Druids, what's going on? It's Preacher! And I guess the ultimate question we should ask after we've covered all these different specs is, should you roll a Druid? If you haven't already, the most Flavor of the Month class in the game right now, if we look over on MMO Champion, actually had some stats recently, which show that the Druid is the most popular class in the game right now. Hardly surprising. Hardly surprising. But what's the longevity of that? And that is enormously propped up by the sudden urge to want to be a laser chicken. How the mighty have changed, right? How the weak have suddenly become so massively strong. The Moonkin, the big joke of 2 expansions, is now kind of the hero. Kind of the hero due to the unique playstyle and all that kind of stuff. But a Druid comes with more than just being a Moonkin and being a Flavor of the Month free roller. A lot of people play Moonkin, yeah, because it speeds up progress, but that affects very few of us. The rest of the guys grabbing onto Moonkins, seeing so like, oh, that's popular, I'll get me a raid spot, and probably not working out that well if you're not able to instantaneously gear them up to your current raid's progress. But neither that or anything else is the big question. A Druid is such an undertaking. How do we even start? 4 specs. 4 unique specs. Each working on their own resource systems and completely different styles of play. It's not like rolling a mage and having a general idea of what's going to happen, or even a shaman. They play pretty similar if you look at just 2 of the specs. Moonkin and Resto, not even close. They're not even close in styles of play. They really are not, and certainly not when you compare Feral to Guardian or Guardian to Moonkin. They're entirely in their own field of styles of play, which makes the question, should you roll a Druid, more tricky. You have to decide what you want to do with your Druid. I think if you're going to be a Druid full-time, you realistically have to be looking at least 2 specs that you enjoy. At least. Because you're playing the most versatile class in the game. You are. You're capable of fulfilling any role. You are always raiding to that level that your guild is at. Always. You're always able to pick up some off-spec gear, to pick up some extra bits and bobs, and switch over and fulfill any role that your guild should require of you. Which always kind of interests me when Druids refuse to respec. I think it's a standard thing that we've said recently, is that you should be able to play all your specs. That's your class. You're not a spec. But with a Druid, that is much more difficult. You're now learning 4 specs that all play completely differently, and you can't really take anything from the other specs into the new one with you. You can't take what you know about tanking into Feral. You can't. They just don't work anywhere near as equally. So I'll put some links down below to skip to the various subjects. We'll have to go over each one, because I have such differing thoughts on each of these specs. And these are things you should be aware of if you pick up a Druid. These are the things you need to know about. If you're picking up a Druid to do blah, you need to know how that compares to the other classes that are also doing blah. Because while the Druid is unique in having access to all 4 roles, those roles are not unique. Those are roles accessible elsewhere. And most of you will be choosing to roll a Druid for 1 spec. Which is why I'm advising you to really consider the fact that you're probably going to be playing 2 at some point and switching between them. And you should be okay with that. And you should bear in mind that if you want to be sort of a ranged and a tank, maybe one of those doesn't actually suit you, and maybe the Druid's not a right fit. So let's start off with Guardian. I've been very outspoken about Guardian recently. I actually spent some of the day going over previous patch notes, because the Guardian Druid is the biggest victim of band-aid fixes in the history of WoW. Easily. And you can go to actually the WoW website. I was surprised to see that Battle.net's, the official WoW website, actually has a full history of every patch in the game, minus some vanilla ones. And it was very quickly and easy to see how often the Guardian Druid was changed on almost a monthly basis. Every major patch involved something which altered the Druid, the Feral Druid as it was at the time, and then the Guardian Druid, and changed it in such a dramatic way. Sometimes its health was like doubled in some cases, and then 3 months later it was quartered back down. Armor was doubled, or bonus armor was doubled, and then reduced back to 1/3 of what it was originally. And huge sweeping changes are prone to happen to the Guardian Druid, which is why it's a band-aided class and why it very much still feels very antiquated. It still is. I tanked out quite a bit on it today, and it still feels to me like playing a vanilla warrior. A vanilla prot warrior, and it's very hard to get away from that, as the entire basis of the Guardian Druid was riding the coattails of a prot warrior. Gameplay wise, I really dislike it. I do, and I can't honestly recommend it to anybody unless you particularly like that style of play, which there are many people out there that do. If you've played it before and you thought, oh, I really like this is my jam, this is what I like compared to everything else, then it's for you. But if you're asking me, as somebody who's maybe you're looking to get into tanking, or you're looking to pick up a tank or anything like that, no, I cannot recommend the Guardian Druid to you. And that's not because of numbers. Often people listen to these videos and it's like, oh, well, their tanking numbers mustn't be right, or their DPS isn't high enough. I don't care about that stuff. Blizzard can easily change that stuff. It's the core gameplay of the Guardian Druid that baffles me. Really does baffle me. And it seems so glued into the past and trying to make, without adding enough new stuff to make it interesting, just trying to make the old stuff work. So if we say that this originally essentially started as a warrior in bear form, which is what it did, mangle his shield slam, lacerate his sunder armor, maul his heroic strike, all these things are built on that foundation. It hasn't evolved in the same way as a warrior has, and while they still have similar abilities, they've added so much more, with especially through their talent system, adding things like Ravager and Blade Storm and all these really fun abilities, and Guardian Druids haven't had that. Despite gaining their own unique talents, or specialization as it's called now, they've had no advantage gained from that. None at all. Really none at all. And when we look at it, it's almost curious as to why it got its own specialization, so it was no longer tied to Feral. And Feral seems to have done quite well out of it. Feral got some very cool things. Claws of Shavala might not be the most amazing DPS gain. In fact, it's not. But it's interesting and it's fun. And then we compare it to things like Pulverize and Bristling Fur, and it's just nowhere near as interesting. It's nowhere near as integral into the gameplay as something like Blood Talons is, which is interesting to use. And Guardian Druids didn't get any of that. And for that reason, I just cannot recommend it. If you're looking to pick up something that you can tank on, and can they do everything? Yes, they can. Absolutely. They can take part in all the content. My statement to you is, if you're thinking of rolling one, if you're thinking of getting involved with a bit of tanking, I just cannot recommend the Guardian Druid to you in comparison to the other tanks. And I think that's the important thing. In comparison to the other tanks, monks play so much better. DKs do, warriors do, and paladins do. They just play naturally smoother, they're more fluid, they're less clunky in areas, and they just naturally seem better fitted to the Warlords of Draenor environment. So if you're looking to roll a Druid and maybe have some tanking off spec, just be prepared to know that maybe you won't have as much fun if you've had some tanking experience in the past, or maybe it might fit for you. Might fit for you, but if somebody plays every tank every week, you know, at some point I try them all out. Guardian Druid is the one I least look forward to, and I can't help that. I can't help but go onto it and go, ugh. You know what? I'll skip it this week. I'll do something else. I'll play something else. It's absolutely not a standard spec I would carry with me. So let's move on to Feral. What a curious bag of cats. Pardon the irony. What a bag of cats this thing is. So strange. It is strange, but it's also kind of okay. Is it for me? No, but that's more of a personal bias. It's a bit too slow for me. I like faster gameplay, especially I'm a big fan of melee. You guys know that. I'm a fan of melee. I want to be a melee. But I like fast, and the reason I want to be a melee is because it's fast, it's interesting, it's on the go. And Feral is just far too surgical in nature for me. It's far too predictable, and just let it happen. Now somebody will go, well, Rogue's predictable. No, not really. No, there's lots of different things that go on with the Rogue that I can take advantage of. I don't feel like I really do that too much with the Feral Druid. Although, I have come away from absolutely hating it, which is in WoD Alpha and WoD Beta, where I absolutely detested the spec and thought, what the hell is this nonsense? I have relented a little bit on that, because there is some interest to be had if you spec it in a certain way. My big worry with the Feral Druid is that the current best DPS spec is the most interesting one. It is. It's the Blood Talons, Incarnation, Glyph of Savage Raw. That's fun. It is. You can have fun on that. Yes, it's a bit slow for my personal taste, but it's quite fun. If that isn't the go-to spec, then I would be bored to fucking death. Oh my god, I would just be like, oh, this is horrible. In comparison to every other melee in the game. And I'm serious. I would be so fed up after a couple of hours of playing that. Oh, just let it go. I want this to be over. Having said that, if you struggle and you're wanting to work yourself into melee, God, does Feral have some nice stepping stones. It does, because you can pick and choose between your talents to add more passives and make the spec slightly easier, and add more unused things, which makes it slightly more skillful and difficult. then you can sort of gradually build yourself up into things like monitoring buffs, tracking information, taking advantage of cooldowns and timers, which are going to be advantageous to you at every level of the game on every single spec and class. The Feral Druid is a wonderful way to ease yourself into doing harder things. And that doesn't necessarily pigeonhole itself into Feral, because unlike other specs which kind of have similar talents, which they do, it's like one talent works one way, one talent works the other way, but they're mostly on use or they're mostly involved doing something. Feral doesn't have that. It has, do you want to use something or do you want to let us handle it for now? Okay, you're getting a bit better now, let's add some more things. If you're switching from range to Feral, I might even recommend it. I might say, yeah, if you've never been melee before, a Feral Druid is kind of okay. One, it's got a slower pace, so you can take your time, so you can pay attention to the more chaotic environment that is melee, which it always is. It's always more chaotic in there. And you're not going to be punished too harshly. And then you can turn your talents up like a dial to find out what's going on there. The disadvantage is with Feral, of course, is it's kind of weak in some areas. It gets very weak when it comes to big AoE, where other classes will just dominate you. But that's a numbers thing. That can be changed. And as I said, we don't focus on numbers thing here. We focus on gameplay. I don't like the AoE of Feral, which is, you know, kind of mundanely running around, raking things and keeping a thrash bleed on. But it's not the worst in the world. It is not. It isn't. Is it the most fun? No. Does it have any impact? No. Does it make me go, whoa? No. But single target, it can certainly have that effect when you line things up with your blood talons and all that kind of stuff. Yes, you can have that effect of a big fuck you straight to the boss, and that's kind of fun, which is why I did enjoy some time with the Feral. Moonkin. Start Moonkins. The thing with the Moonkin right now is it's very fitting to the model. Are they good? Yes. But they are very well designed for WoD encounters so far. And that could change. That could change. At its very core, the Balanced Druid, with its changes to Eclipse in WoD, has become fundamentally less interesting. It has. I'll say it. And I know there's lots of people out there going, well, I'm a Moonkin now and I'm kicking ass and taking names. Yes, everybody loves a pretty damage meter. We all do. Everyone loves a pretty damage meter. It's nice to be on top. It's nice to be the king. All that kind of nonsense. But fundamentally, a lot of that is coming from the fact that Moonkins are nicely suited to plenty of fights. Their core design is very, very good for the way bosses are designed now. Will that continue? I don't know. I can't say yes, I can't say no. But ultimately, it's a very sterile spec of which you have little control over. And there's no getting away from that. That's something we can say is definitely a thing and will probably continue. Switching Eclipse is controlled by the game. You basically are along for the ride. You are. Like it or not, you're basically along for the ride and the game tells you what buttons you should be pressing. There is some leeway, but not a lot. Not a lot. There is some leeway should I cast Wrath slightly earlier, and people will certainly find ways to push it to make it to produce more numbers. But at its core fundamental side, the Balanced Druid is a very simple spec. It's definitely got capabilities to push it up to make a better player better. No doubt about that. Every spec in the game does. It doesn't need to be said. But at its core style of play, it's really not that interesting. You're basically just following where your Eclipse bar is. And if the numbers go down, I think people might be left with something that's not that amazing. And maybe start getting a little bit tired when your Starfall isn't wrecking face. If there's nothing to Starfall, you probably won't be wrecking as much face. And we can't see whether that's going to be a thing. So far, the future is pretty rosy for Moonkins. And if you've rolled one recently to join in some BRF and sort of get yourself into a raid guild, you're going to be fine for now. But what you might end up being left with as a player is something that is not as interesting as you thought it was. Because if the damage meters don't stay pretty, and you don't get to do hilarious things like Flappy Bird onto balconies and Starfall awkwardly placed AoEable mobs that other people get really annoyed by because they're, for some reason, spaced out in a way that can't be easily cleaved, thank you Blizz, where Starfall shines, then maybe that attitude will change. And then you'll look at it and go, well, okay, I'm kind of just following along here. The Moonkin also has plenty of other things going for it, though. You are the go-to combat resin, and there's nothing wrong with that. And yeah, right now, it's a very cool spec, because having said those things like, what if, and it is a what if this changes, what if the bosses are no longer designed in such a way to cater to the design of Moonkins, like they are right now, well, several of them are, then maybe your attitude will change, or perhaps you will still continue to gain bosses where you get to do hilarious things with your Moonkins. Things that other classes simply cannot do. And that will be fun. It will be. It will be hilarious fun. It is fun to Flappy Bird onto balconies. I've done it. Flappy Birding and Star Falling is all that kind of stuff. It's great fun. I've done it and it's nice. It is great. And so far there are several bosses where you can do that. Popping that Starfall before you get grabbed by the hands and just seeing you destroy the whole room is fun. It is. It doesn't matter about the numbers. That very aspect of what you're doing is great. Everyone else is having to target their AoE. Scrubs. While you stand there Flappy Birding around just being an absolute bro. And yeah, if the bosses continue to be designed in such a way, which I kind of suspect they will, if you want my personal opinion, kind of suspect they will, then yeah, Moonkid's going to be a good choice and a solid caster. If you enjoy ranged, you're going to be okay. I think so. The utility they bring with the combat res in this day and age is actually quite nice. It is. And the future looks pretty rosy. For the restos, I had to go back and play it again. I did. I had to go back and play it again for a little while, because I used to love the Resto Druid, but I found myself not so much bored with the Resto Druid, and I think it's unfair to say that maybe it's become a little bit lackluster on me, but I'm a little bit tired of the healing model in WoD. So that might skew my opinion of them a little bit. It's a very predictable style, even as we move up to... I've healed some normals and stuff and some heroics, but it's very samey in terms of predictable what's going to happen, and that kind of drags a little bit of the fun out of it. Especially considering you can't really be the saviour. It's nice to be the saviour sometimes. It's nice to be, like, doing things that others aren't, but you can't. You're really held back by the system. Well, recently we've had spirit buffs and whatever, so maybe mana's not an issue as much anymore. I haven't played since then. So... it's all swings and roundabouts in there. Gameplay-wise, they're great. They have an answer for every question. And as a healer, that's where it really becomes important. God, it does. If you don't have an answer for every question, you're on the bench. There are plenty of fights where certain healers just aren't wanted. And you're not wanted because your toolset doesn't answer the questions this boss poses. Resto Druids don't have that problem. And it's nice, relaxing style of play. You also have the advantage of being able to move all the goddamn time, which is amazing. Other healers just don't have that advantage. And that allows you to do some kind of cool things. Like I was talking about earlier, you can do some cool things. You can't be the saviour, but you can do some very cool things other healers can't. And that always is going to get you some nice raid spots and probably generally a nice amount of happiness with your class. If you ever get bored with it, it's probably due to other factors rather than it being a Resto Druid. The style of healing, the talent system is really well designed. You can tailor that spec to anything you want it to do. And if you're looking to get into healing, it's great. If you're used to moving around a lot, it's great because you can still do that. It frees you up to not be as punished when you have to move around or die in fire and pay attention to those things. Because often you're casting like a rejuve or something like that, which keeps your eyes free to look for other things. It's a wonderfully, wonderfully designed spec. Wonderfully designed spec, and I can't really recommend it enough. There are other healers who come close, but Resto Druid is still one of my top ones. It really is. What about the future for the Druid over the course of the expansion? I can't see much, if anything, changing, honestly. However they play now, I think we're going to see that. If they haven't done anything with Guardian yet, I can't see them doing anything with it until the next expansion, honestly. And where they're probably going to do some sort of interesting revamp. I'll call it now that the Guardian Druid will get some sort of revamp in the next expansion, which will probably be pretty indicative of how they're going to be over the next few years, but will be very different to how they are now. Feral is in a good place. My big concern, as I said, for future predictions is they try and balance, and I put this in inverted quotation marks, balance the other talents, like the Claws of Shrivala, and to meet the demands of Blood Talons, and maybe even Lunar Inspiration. And at that point, it could become extremely dull. Extremely dull, which is always my fear when I recommend to you to roll something, is that beware, this spec has a possibility of becoming very mundane. Very, very mundane, but it's not in that position right now. But Blizzard is trying to balance everything. They're trying constantly to balance stuff, and if that happens with those talents, Oh my god, we could end up in a right mess. Moonkin will stay as it is. Everybody's so happy with Moonkin, it's not getting touched. It might have a damage numbers. Starfall might get nerfed again, or something might happen, but it's unlikely. I think they realise now that they designed the encounters in a way that suited Moonkins, and that probably is playing an effect into the next raid tier, is that there won't be fights that like really suit Moonkins specifically. I would imagine that's going to be the case. If I was to make a prediction, Blizzard was like, well, let's not nerf Moonkins because they're actually fine. Yeah, they're actually okay DPS-wise. They're not a big problem. Let's just not design encounters that suit them so fucking well. And that would be the most likely outcome of that. In terms of Resto, no changes. I can't see what they would change, honestly, after playing it over and over and over again. It was my most played spec of the Druid, besides Moonkin. I can't see them doing anything with it. I couldn't even suggest a way to go with it right now. It has a really wonderful, versatile talent system. I think it's got to stay that way. I can see the Resto Druid barely changing from now and probably into the next 3 years and being very, very similar. Very, very similar. Unless the actual game changes how it's going to heal, I can't see anything happening to it. So should you roll a Resto Druid? I hope I've answered every question you could think of, and those are my personal opinions on it. I hope so. It's a long one. Thank you, guys. Have a good day, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.